if you are arrested now, nobody will take care of your kids, your husband, your home. And at the end of the day, we need you on board. We need you to do this thing. We need you to be safe. We need you to be sound. We need you to be healthy. So currently, what we do is a part of doing that. We are trying to build safe spaces where we can run in case need arises. Although it is very limited here because there are little or no call lines. We don't have access to justice in my country. If you are caught in a peaceful protest, what we call a peaceful protest, you don't have, if you are caught and you are arrested, you don't have anybody. Most often, your case is sent to the military court. Sometimes you are turned a terrorist. So we just have ourselves to lean on and to protect ourselves. And another thing is we have little or no knowledge about active protection. We don't have allies. We don't really have allies that we can rely on in case we are out there doing any protest, any youthful protest, any women protest. We don't have allies that can say, okay, if things go bad, like what she was saying, oh, if things go red, what do you do? So we just try within our reach to talk to the women and say, okay, we'll take this road, we'll take this road. If things go bad, we can go like this or we can do like this. And then another thing is that it's advisable for women to, we call on young women in this space to take advantage of free online courses and learn techniques of advocacy and lobbying to create visibility and improve their communities. Because most often we only rely on online programs for women. We educate our women through most online programs on how to protect themselves in such situations, in civic spaces and in political spaces.
Thanks, Nanyene. Both you and Philomena now have talked about this power of knowledge for protection, but also the power of numbers for protection. And I want to ask Leonardo. Leonardo, you're a member and founder of several youth networks. How do you see these networks playing into safe and enabling spaces for protection?
Thank you, Rachel. I see this as a critical component. One of the main aspects is that if you're alone, you need to deal with things by yourself. But when you come together with others, you can really see how people's power emerge. And for us, I think that's a key point. One example is with Juventudes por la Paz. Through this network, we have been able to raise the issue of what is happening in Colombia, not only to keep reaching the same corners within Colombia, but to be able to expand and being a news that is spread all over Latin America. For us, that's being critical to make this situation known and to get more actors involved to give support. Now, another key component is that within these networks, we already have some people who have gone through this series of threats, and they know more specifically what's the procedure to go about them. They know how to look for protection at a local level, and when things get rough, how to look for some international partners to be able to help out in that situation. And I think that's the beautiful things about networks, is that you might not know the answer, but there's certainly someone in your circle who have access to that. And like in Philomena's example, it's something more strategic when you're in a network. So you know how to better react when something happens in a protest. You have already a protocol developed. You have some safety options in case A or B happens. And I think that's really critical. As well, the fact that these networks are not limited to just one country, but include several other countries, and not just one organization, but several organizations. I think it makes it easier for you to have access to some protection measures that might be abroad, and it could speed up the process if you need urgent protection to be able to have it. So I think this is a key pillar of support of activist movements, and it's a key component also of a nonviolent strategy, looking in the long term, how to face these protection issues.
Yeah, great points. And maybe we can return to this topic of what international partners can bring in terms of protection. Before we do, I wanted to ask Adam, when talking about your work previously, you have described how human rights defenders need support not only to survive. I mean, we've talked about all of these really existential challenges that activists face, but you also point to the need to support them to thrive. What do you mean by that, and how does that support look?
So what I mean is effectively that the kind of support I'm talking about are effectively resources. I mean, you've heard from your other panelists very effectively what they were referring to, whether we're talking about networks or the fellow activists that they're with, the different groups. You're talking about community, and from those communities are indeed comes power, but also comes collective protection, and comes some element of resources, whether it's the different types of knowledge or strategy or tactics or responsibilities. But I think beyond that, and this gets to a little bit the role of the international community, there needs to be additional resources brought to bear. And part of that is about the survival side, the protection side. When activists, when human rights defenders, when youth activists are forced to spend their time struggling to figure out how to put together not only a plan for protection, but actually how to resource it, that takes time away from them doing their actual work, from doing the thriving, right? From achieving peace, from achieving social change, from achieving new legislation on climate change, for instance. Whatever that is, that donors can make easier, that international partners can make easier, that institutions can make easier in order to ensure the protection side, that takes care of that piece, and then allows greater time, greater creativity, greater attention and other resources to go towards the actual work, to the what they're trying to achieve. What we're seeing in some of the donor space is an increased awareness about security for human rights defenders. And I suspect that's probably starting to happen in the youth sector as well. That shouldn't come though at the expense. The funding for that shouldn't come from the work that's going towards projects. And that's a fear. Of course, there's a limited amount of resources available, but it shouldn't be seen that when you apply for a grant or that you're asking for support, that when you're asked to submit a security plan, as increasingly donors are asking recipients to do, that they say, okay, 10% of your budget that you're applying for your project now has to go towards security. It should be an add-on, not a replacement. And that's the way we can ensure not only security measures are taken seriously, and that activists put time into thinking about this, but that they don't have to take away from what they really want to do, which is not spend time thinking about how they're going to be safe, but think about how they're going to actually make change.
Yeah, really great points. And it brings us nicely to the last question. I want to give everyone an opportunity to answer very briefly, and then we'll jump into discussion with the audience and their questions. How can the international community and national governments better protect young people and promote these safe and inclusive environments that go beyond surviving to thriving? Let's start with Nanyene.
Okay.
Nanyene, we can't hear you. We'll come back to you. Leonardo, can you share?
Okay. The question is, how can the international community and national government better protect young people, if I'm correct?
Yeah, correct.
I would say in our context, In our content, the first thing is to provide safe spaces for young people to share their story on protection issues in their country, which is what I think we are currently doing now. Um, I think both national and international to build the capacities of young people on protection issues, especially on protection issues in civil and political spaces. And again, to build a network for young peace builders, because if there is a network, like what Adam was saying, if there is a network, you will be able to know that this person has this potential, this person has this potential, this person can help you access security in this particular area. And then to provide psychosocial support for young activists who are actually in detention, who have been molested, and all of that, and then to create a network of young activists.
Great, thank you. And this topic of psychosocial support is one I'm sure we're going to explore further. Leonardo, do you want to briefly share your advice?
Sure. I think there are some specific measures we can take on this area. I will resonate with what Adam was mentioning regarding specific funding directed from the international community for protection of young people. I think particularly here, young people can be at risk not only from threats that are outside the government, but they can come from within the government. And in these cases, you cannot ask your aggressor to protect you at the same time. It doesn't really make sense. So you will need to have a strong structure coming from the international community to be able to also bring you that kind of protection and ensure that in this kind of situations you will not be left alone. So my suggestion here is first start to create this space for young people to come together and be better informed of which mechanisms are out there to be protected, and then be able to channel resources, and ideally in a really quick fashion in order to really help activists when they need it the most, and not when that resources might not be needed.
Thanks. Adam, anything you want to add before we end with Philomena?
Yeah, I would just say two things. One is I think some of it is just a very, very practical, tactical type stuff. I think the international community, UN and other agencies can be very effective at working with, for instance, police departments and security forces for new training with sensitivity towards youth and the work that youth are doing. So there are a certain level of things like that that I think can be achieved. I would add, besides sort of the international community and national governments to the list, and look at business. And I think the recent experience in the United States is instructive in one regard, in that imagine if the Black Lives Matter movement today did not find allies in the business world, if we didn't see corporations, to some extent certainly exploiting it for various reasons. But the fact that Black Lives Matter has become something that corporations are contributing to, that are speaking about, has conditioned and changed, I think, the way that the government in the United States wanted to respond, particularly this administration. It has conditioned, although there certainly is, as was mentioned earlier, gaslighting and other things happening in right-wing media. I think that the kind of alliance that has emerged with a lot of corporate actors forces the authorities in the United States to rethink how they're going to respond and how effective they can be at criminalizing and defaming the youth-led movement in the United States. And I think it's been quite instructive. I think what's happened globally with LGBT and corporate alliances has also been very interesting and helped advance that movement on an international level. So I would just throw that into the mix and say that that might be an area for ways to approach getting governments to work for better protection and respect for youth movements.
Yeah, super interesting. And I know, Philomena, you've spoken before about how when corporate interests meet activism, you know, this is a really powerful place to foment change. But Philomena, did you want to add anything else in terms of recommendations for the international community and national governments on better protecting young activists?
I think everyone pretty much covered what I was going to say, essentially. My biggest thing when we're talking about on a domestic level here is just actually accountability. I genuinely think, and it's always been consistent throughout the world, America always needs to be condemned by the international world before they really actually take action. We saw this with the civil rights movement. We saw that those atrocities were happening forever. But once the world saw the images, it incited a level of just outrage that shocked everybody and kind of made America feel ashamed because they tend to portray themselves as this moral police of the world. So how can you be the watchdog of the world, but within your own society, you can't fix the moral issues? So I think that that's where it needs to be. I think the pressure of actually taking on these resolutions, adopting them on an international level, then working with our representatives to actually adopt it on a domestic level would be the next step. Because as long as there's no actual laws and policies that hold the American government accountable, they will always find loopholes because that's how the Constitution was written to begin with. And that's why we are in the current state that we're in, because there's legalities that allow for Black people and just marginalized people as a whole to be oppressed.
Really powerful note to end on there. We have already a few questions coming in from the audience for different speakers. The first I will direct to Nanyene. We have a comment. Fellow Cameroonian American here. Thank you so much for speaking out on the Anglophone crisis happening in our home country. What are some ways you believe Cameroonians in the States or abroad can help?
Hello?
We hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, firstly is to build our capacities on protection issues for young activists. That is our first need. We need our capacities to be built on those issues. We will need alliances. That's the second thing. We need alliances. We need a network to say, okay, if we have a group, if we have a protest, if we have a program, if we have a work to do, we work on it with our alliances. We know if things go wrong this way, we have backups this way. We have people over there in America that could be able to back us up in providing a legal aid, providing psychosocial support, providing whatsoever thing that is needed.
Yeah. Pretty good points. And it aligns well with a lot of the advice that each panelist was giving. I'll turn to Adam. There's a question here. Do you have experience with raising visibility for activists that have already been targeted? In other words, are already in jail. And in your experience, does heightened visibility help in those situations or make it worse?
So certainly we at Frontline Defenders, part of a lot of our work is about raising cases and awareness about defenders, human rights defenders who are criminalized in various ways. And some of it does involve, being sentenced to prison and sometimes for lengthy prison terms. We do continue to campaign and raise awareness and advocate for those individuals even after they've been sent to jail, and continue to work on their cases through a variety of international mechanisms and regional mechanisms. Generally speaking, once, it depends, every country is slightly different. It also depends on what kind of issues that the person was working on prior to being detained. But generally speaking, the work that is done outside doesn't particularly harm the defender while they're in prison. It's usually they're being punished for what they were doing prior to arrest. And generally speaking, that punishment will continue inside prison, for some period of time, usually. And then if the prisoner themselves take any action, like hunger strike or other kind of organizing in prison, then that's another way that they do get additional, pressure or intimidation or harm. But we have, I think, in almost every case that I'm aware of, whether the person is imprisoned in Iran or in China or in Colombia or in Mexico, we find that the activists themselves and their support networks do want international attention, and they do feel that and we hear from people after they leave prison that one of the things that helps them get through the prison experience, whether it's for 1 month or 10 years, is the fact that they find out and know about the action that's going on outside and the attention that their case continues to receive.
Interesting. Yeah, and that gets also kind of to this topic of the psychological toll that a lot of these human rights defenders and activists face. And a question came in, Philomena, for you. How do you deal with the stress and emotional territory that comes with being a co-founder of such a huge socio-political group?
I think for me, I'm actually a psychology major, so I'm a little bit more self-aware than the average person. So I do see a therapist. I recommend that. I think it's healthy to unpack, and not just unpacking from a standpoint of an activist in general, but just as a person that for my entire life, I've dealt with depression. I was born in Congo. I lived in a refugee camp. And then I come to America thinking that it's going to be this utopian society. And then come to find out there's the same embedded colonization. And so it's kind of been a rough path for me in understanding and feeling like no matter where I am, I'm not safe. But I think that for me, in a sense, protesting allows me to kind of let it out, because it allows me to voice myself and voice my frustrations and say, well, you know what, although throughout my entire life, colonization has kind of basically made me a nomad in a way, I feel like I still have a voice and I can still fight for that and provide a better future for those behind me. So it sounds cliche, but that's basically how I cope. I cope by protesting. That's how I let it out. That's how I let out my frustrations. Anyone that's ever seen my videos or how it is I protest, I'm pretty passionate. I'm pretty straightforward. I come pretty hard. And that's how I deal with it. I pray a lot. I'm religious. I pray a lot. I'm a Christian. And that's just how I keep it going in my family and food.
Yeah, interesting. So there's also somehow a therapeutic element to being able to express yourself and exercise your rights, which is, again, why repression of those rights just doubles down on all of the difficulties. Leonardo, there's a question for you, which I think you've answered in part, but if you wanted to add anything else, the question is, what can the international community do to support Colombian youth?
Yeah, sure. I think there are many ways in which the international community can contribute. First of all, I think is giving more visibility to the issue that we're facing. I mean, when it comes to international media and how much has been published about it, I can only recall one article in the New York Times, one article in the Guardian, and that's it for the whole situation that's been happening. And for us, that's outrageous that given the severity of what's going on, there's no much international visibility to it. So that would be the first point for us. The second point is to start to reach out to different social groups and networks that are organized in Colombia, and somehow start to create this dialogue when we have the chance to talk with peace builders in other areas of the world. They have helped us to talk about what's going on, contact local media in the places where they're living, see some other mechanisms of support through some of their knowledge in organizing campaigns, some of their knowledge in how to create more cohesion and strategic planning for the movement. So in general, we feel that giving more visibility to what's happening, and giving support in terms of how to be able to better organize non-violently. Those will be really key steps to move forward, and also asking the local systems of diplomacy to generate more pressure in Colombia, as Filomena was mentioning. Unless governments start condemning what's happening here, and taking this issue seriously, it will be really hard to move forward and create the necessary pressure for things to change. But we believe that uh, if there are different pressure points coming from all over the world, it's easier for the government to start to act. So this will be my recommendation.
It's a lot of work for us all to do in supporting young activists. There's one more question. I'll direct it to Nanyene. I am Umar Adamu from Ghana, and Executive Director of Center for Muslim Youth and Peace and Development. It's not easy to express your democracy rights to demonstrate in African countries because most of the governments want to show the world they are at peace with people. So I guess maybe the question here might be, how do you act? How do you take action in repressed civic spaces? Nanyene, do you want to share anything on that point?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Firstly, what we try to do is, since we don't really have access to peaceful protests, we use our social media handles to do our activism a lot. We use the WhatsApp, we use the Twitter. If you go to my Twitter page, Showcase, very Showcase one, you will see a lot of activism, a lot of activities that we do online. That is what we actually do, because we can't go out to protest because the government is showing the world that no, everything is in control, whereas that is not the case. So what we do is we use our social media handles very well. When we have a protest, most often we assemble ourselves, we plan it online, and then we storm our social media handles. We can say we are going to take a 2-hour Twitter chat. We go on from 12 p.m. to 2 p.m. on Twitter, and then we say what we think is wrong. If we are 100 women, all of us go online at the same time, and we tag most diplomatic institutions, we tag other individuals who can be interested in our program. So strategically, that is what we have been using so far.
Great. There are so many topics to unpack and dive into further here, which we just don't have time for. You'll see listed in the chat the social media handles for all of our wonderful panelists if you want to keep the discussion going. We also had a comment that I think is really great to point out to everyone here. The UN Youth Envoy's Office is conducting a survey to document a lot of these experiences of young activists to help develop guidelines on how to strengthen protection of young activists within shrinking civic spaces. The link is also in the chat. Please contribute to that survey. And if there is nothing else, I will turn it back to Maya.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you to each of our panelists today for the incredible insight and stories that you've shared. For those watching in the US, we encourage you specifically to urge your representatives to support the YPS Act. I just posted a link in the chat, which is a resource from our coalition member FCNL that helps you to write and send an email to your representatives in less than 2 minutes to ensure that your voice is being heard. So please just take a couple of minutes after the webinar to do that if you are US based. The next installment in the #YesForYPS series will be in 2 weeks from now, entitled Social Justice, Youth Changing the Tide in North America, featuring youth activist speakers from Mexico, Canada, and the United States. So be on the lookout for more information and invitation email coming from the coalition very soon for that. And if you've not had the chance to yet, I also just posted our Twitter and Facebook information. The coalition has new pages for both of those, so please go ahead and give us a follow to keep up to date on future events like this webinar series. Thank you so much everyone for attending, and once again, thank you so much to all of our incredible panelists. You did a fantastic job. I feel like I learned so much in this short amount of time as well, and I hope everyone has a fantastic rest of their day. Thank you.
Thank you, wonderful panelists. You're amazing.
Thank you guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.